So I'm going to take a few podcast or take a few points from this book and make maybe one or two podcasts depending on how quickly we can get through it. So it's a big book and has lots of details. Very nice in terms of country level climate issues, what they have to plan for in terms of adaptation. And each country is addressing adaptation is put together as a bullet point of innovations and adaptations. So the book is called The Climate Change Crisis Solutions and Adaptation for a Planet in Peril. This is by Ross Michael Pink. So I already said I'm not a big fan of this descriptor climate crisis because everybody who says it is living basically a normal life, and it's not clear why we can live a normal life and keep saying we're in a crisis. So innovation and adaptation strategies. So I won't go into the title or the pointer to the country details in terms of climate, etc., or climate issues they have to worry about, but we'll just look at the countries and their list of innovation and adaptation strategies. So Canada ratified Paris Agreement in 2016. Its nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement communicates its economy-wide target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below the 2005 levels in 2030. So this is absolute levels. Many countries like India have given GDP intensity or carbon intensity of GDP and not absolute levels, but we have to be careful about that. After accounting for forestry, we estimate this reduction of 20% below 2005 levels and 3% below 1990 levels of GHG emissions, excluding land use change, and forestry. Okay, so if deforestation, wildfires are creating other sources, that's not accounted for here, or any conversion to agriculture and so on. So land use change forcing, in this case, however, Canada is unlikely to meet this target. Canadian Environmental Protection 1999 directs the government to protect the environment and human health in order to foster sustainable development. Climate and Clean Air Coalition to reduce short-lived climate pollutants is established. Since 2012, the CCAC has grown to include more than 70 partners, and there are many countries in this long list. 2011 to 2016, Government of Canada allocated US $148.8 million in funding to support an improved understanding of climate change and to assist Canadians to prepare for the impact of climate change. All provinces in Canada have set up adaptation strategies. In 2013, the Canadian government allocated funds for Arctic research through Natural Science and Engineering Research Council's Climate Change and Atmospheric Research Initiative. The funding includes $32 million over 5 years to 7 university-based research programs. Finally, as a result of collective action by governments, consumers and industry, Canada's 2020 emissions are projected to be 128 million tons lower than they would have been under a no-action scenario. So this is being recorded in 2023, so you can go and see what actually happened. This is equivalent of shutting down 37 coal-fired electricity generation plants. Moreover, Canada's per capita emissions are at a historic low of 20.4 tons of CO2 equivalent per person, their lowest level since tracking began in 1990. Canada has also demonstrated progress in decoupling emissions growth from economic growth, so they can grow GDP without increasing carbon emissions. Since 2005, Canadian GHG emissions have decreased by 4.8%, while economy has grown by 8.4%. So they again ratified the original framework in 1992. Moving to the US. The USA ratified Paris Agreement in 2016, just before Obama, I think, completed his term. As you know, Al Gore was very active in the 1992 agreement, but then he couldn't even present the ratification process to Congress because they knew it wouldn't pass, and then George Bush denied it and pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and so on and so forth. So and then Trump came and similar things. So US keeps going back and forth on this. Biden is back in. For the US, its intended nationally determined contributions became its nationally determined contributions. Under its NDC, the US has pledged to reduce net GHG emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 in 2025, including land use change and forestry. So it includes LULUCF equivalent to 19 to 24% below 2005 levels, excluding LULUCF and equivalent to 6 to 12% below 1990 levels, excluding the land use again. The US's NDC clearly highlights ongoing actions to enhance regulatory framework, so the achievements of the 2020 and 2025 targets seem feasible, but as we know, elections every 4 years and the off-year elections as well, with Congress and White House struggling to agree on these things, even though surveys say public supports climate action and so on. There is a UNFCCC commitment to reduce emissions by 17% by 2020 in relation to 2005 levels. American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 designates US dollars $94 billion to renew energy technology, low carbon vehicles, mass transit, and energy efficient initiatives. The Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 promotes the production of renewable fuels and lowers dependence on oil. So US has had gas sources on its own territory and has reduced carbon intensity, but you have to be careful about still burning fossil fuels, and the portfolio of renewable energy is not as high as you would think in terms of the total energy production. Energy Policy Act 2005 allocates $4.3 billion in tax incentives for nuclear power. Hasn't caught on in terms of just the number of new plants. US dollars $2.7 billion to extend the renewable electricity production credit, and $1.6 billion in tax incentives for investment in clean coal facilities. Is that an oxymoron, clean coal facilities? Well, there are some states which will not go away from coal, so these are compromises. Former President Jimmy Carter built a new 1.3 megawatt solar plant on a farm where he once cultivated soybeans and peanuts. The 3,852 solar panels, which can move to follow the sun, can generate enough renewable energy for more than half of the 683-person town of Plains, Georgia, where now Carter has moved into a hospice, and actually already 6 months in the hospice, so he's not as close to the end as people assumed when he moved to the hospice. God bless him. In 1997, the USA signed but did not ratify Kyoto Accord, so there we go. Or the Paris Agreement is now signed by Biden, but what happens in the after the 24 election is anybody's guess. So, moving to South America, Brazil signed the Paris Agreement in 2016. It also committed by international treaties and domestic policy to reduce GHG emissions substantially. Government targets include relative to 2005 an estimated reduction in terms of emissions intensity, so not GHGs, emissions intensity in 2025 by 70% and in 2030 by 79%. This represents a reduction of 48% in emissions by 2030. Brazil has voluntarily committed to reduce GHG emissions as well to between 36.1 and 38.9% by 2020. COVID came, lots of things went haywire, so we have to check on this. The government has instituted a number of progressive initiatives to mitigate climate change. These steps include 2010 Brazil National Fund on Climate Change, so I won't read all of them, but you can see from 1992 to 2010 there have been a bunch of initiatives. Moving to Ecuador. Ecuador signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, has signed but not ratified the following environmental agreements: Antarctic Environment Protocol, Antarctic Treaty, Biodiversity, Climate Change Kyoto Protocol, Diversification, Endangered Species, Hazardous Waste, Ozone Layer Protection, Ship Pollution, Tropical Timber 83, Tropical Timber 94, and Wetlands. So those fall under the red, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation of forests. The country is implementing the National Strategy for Climate Change as per Decree 1815. That's not the year. This decree establishes the preparation and launch of National Strategy for Climate Change for 2012 to 2025. The Ecuadorian government is, in concert with the regional authorities, has inaugurated a major new project with the UN World Food Programme and the UNFCCC Adaptation Fund that is designed to build community and ecosystem resilience, reduce climate vulnerability, and enhance food security. So when economic development goals are synergistic with adaptation goals and resilience building, then you have a much better chance of making room in the budget and making fiscal policies to integrate adaptation into a budget process. 4 provinces have been selected containing 2 important watersheds. So these are some more actions that I won't read all of them, but these are organized around 2 main goals: to develop community level awareness and knowledge on climate change and food insecurity related risks, and to increase adaptive capacity for climate change. Okay, so let's move to Argentina. In 2016, Argentina ratified Paris Agreement. 2015, Law 27199 was introduced, amendment law, and so those deal with a national promotion for production and use of renewable sources of electric energy, and introduce new provisions to promote development of renewable energy sources. So we are mixing adaptation, mitigation with common technologies that serve both, as we talked about before. There are many renewable energy examples for adaptation that we have discussed as well earlier in the course. Stringent targets on production of a proportion of Argentina's electricity supply to come from renewable source: 8% by December 31, 2017, 12%, 16%, 18%, and 20%, ramping up to 2025. So Argentina has submitted NDCs and plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including land use change, so LULUCF, by 15% below its business as usual scenario by 2030. So that's equivalent to 60% above 2010 levels, or 128% above 1990 levels, excluding LULCF. So how the NDCs are dealt with: it's a democratic process, bottom-up submissions, voluntary commitments, but one has to monitor, verify, and report these progresses as well. So there is a national system of prevention and mitigation of farming emergencies and disasters. There is a Agricultural Emergency Act and National System for Prevention and Mitigation of Agricultural Emissions, Emergencies, and Disasters that we mentioned. The objective being prevent and mitigate the damage caused by climate factors that significantly affect agricultural production and rural communities directly and indirectly. So Argentina is also a member of the RED program for reducing forest degradation and emission from reducing deforestation and degradation of forests as well. So this is consistent with what we talked about before, that if adaptation can make agriculture more resilient and reduce its contribution to GDP, then GDP becomes more resilient to climate, and overall societal resilience goes up as well. We're moving to Asia now. Thailand signed the Paris Agreement in 2016 but has not ratified as of this paper, as of this book's publication, I think 21. Thailand Climate Change Master Plan is there for 2015 to 2050. National Strategic Plan on Climate Change Management was released in 2012. Establishment of Thai Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. Thailand established Climate Change Management and Coordination Division. It ratified Kyoto Accord in 2002, signed UNFCCC in 92, so it's reverse chronological order here for whatever reason. Thailand Energy Conservation and Promotion Act was set up in 2012. Additional points: important climate initiatives include the following. Bureau of Royal Energy, Royal Rain Making is established an operation center in the north to combat persisting droughts and haze. The center has been set up in Muang district of Chiang Mai province with the goal of minimizing drought impact. A national focal point for climate change in the Ministry of Health was established. National communication submitted to UNFCCC includes health implications of climate change mitigation policies. Thailand has initiated plans to build institutional and technical capacities to address climate change and health. So as a tropical country rich for diseases, it's expectedly focused on health impacts as well. Thailand initiated a national assessment of climate change impacts, vulnerability and adaptation for health. An integrated disease surveillance and response system includes development of early warning and response systems for climate sensitive health risks that have been initiated. Moving to Myanmar, did sign Paris Climate Change Accord in 2016. They have a disaster management law which is designed to initiate disaster management programs, coordinating with the government departments on response to disaster management, rebuild affected areas, develop and provide restoration services and health and development to affected individuals, and bring about better living conditions for victims. National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Myanmar joined UN REDD program, and in 2011 National Environmental and Health Action Plan set up. So water security, air quality, environmental health systems, climate change, ozone depletion, ecosystem changes are put into this plan. National Sustainable Development Strategy was established, including 3 important components: the sustainable management of natural resources, economic development, and sustainable social development. Again, synergizing development with these adaptation goals is critical for it being realized with a higher probability. Myanmar ratified the Kyoto Protocol in 2003, ratified UNFCCC in 1994. By 2030, Myanmar's permanent forest estate goal is to increase the amount of forested land that includes reserved forest and protected public forest, which will constitute 30% of the total national land area. Myanmar is a very nice, rich rain belt with a lot of forests. Protected area systems will be 10% of the total country land area. Let's read one more before stopping this podcast to keep it at a reasonable length. Japan ratified the Paris Agreement in 2016. December 2015, Japan formulated its policy for global warming prevention measures based on Paris Agreement. In 2016, the Cabinet approved both the Plan for Global Warming Countermeasures based on the Act on Promotion of Global Warming Countermeasures and the Government Action Plan. An important goal is the 26% reduction of GHG emissions by fiscal year 2030 and 80% reduction by FY 2050. Of course, the Fukushima disaster has made some problems for its climate action goals, because they got very jittery about nuclear plants and started ramping up coal, so they still have to deal with the aftermath of what happened in Fukushima, even though that was not related to climate change but was driven by tsunami damage to a nuclear plant. In 2016, the Act on Promotion of Global Warming Countermeasures was revised. In 2015, Japan submitted its INDC, which includes emissions reduction target of 26% below 2013 emission levels by 2030, equivalent to 18% below 1990 levels by 2030. At the Conference of Parties 21, it doesn't correspond to the year, Japan pledged to provide in 2020 approximately yuan 1.3 trillion of public and private climate finance, so 1.3 times up from the current level, to developing countries, so as part of the contribution to the Global Climate Action Fund. Japan Center for Climate Change Action local centers are assigned to 47 prefectures, which are like their districts, and 8 cities as of 2013 December. Japan is promoting the diffusion of combined heat and power, such as household fuel cells and INI farms. The goal is to introduce 5.3 million household fuel cells INI farms into market by 2030. You can understand heat pumps and combined heat and power plants elsewhere in my podcasts. The government will extensively promote energy efficient vehicles, namely hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, clean diesel vehicles, and compressed natural gas vehicles, with the goal of increasing the share of these vehicles in new car sales from 50 to 70% by 2030. Toyota did invest a lot on clean hydrogen, and fuel cells hasn't gone so well so far, but they lead the world in hybrid cars and so on, electric vehicles, even though other countries are beginning to grab chunks of the market along the way, like Germany and China. So maybe it's good to stop here. It is 20 minutes long. We can wrap this up, I'm sure, in another podcast of reasonable length. Okay, see you in the next podcast.